recording is on. So, Brodos wanted to do some stuff on raidbots and bloodmallet about DPS, so I thought I'd run this session, and a lot of you were interested, which is cool. As I said, it's mostly going to be in the web browser, so I would very much suggest that you click on the Twitch stream and watch from there, because I'm not really going to do too much in-game except for cut and paste something. So, as I said, this is just DPS. It's not going to help all that much with knowing what talents to use. You still need to use the guides for talents and rotations and all that kind of stuff, but it will help you choose gear, essences, azurite, and now corrupted things. So I'll switch to this browser. So this is the raidbots site, raidbots.com. It's more or less useless without the add-on. You can load your character in from the armory, but you don't get any of the extra gear in your bags, so it's not really very helpful in choosing between different bits of gear. So the add-on is called Simulation Craft, which is the program that's behind raidbots, and it really doesn't do anything except allow you to cut and paste a blob of text that it contains your character and all of your gear, and then paste it into the website. So after you install the add-on, you get this little icon on your minimap, and when you click the icon, it just brings up this text window with everything highlighted. And the only thing that you're supposed to do, and the only thing that the add-on does, is Control C or some other character if you're on a Mac to copy that out. Yeah, cool. So really the only useful part of this, or the most useful part of it, is the top gear. There's a bunch of other selections there that look like they might be helpful, but over time they've kind of put them all into top gear. So you just click on top gear, and in this box here you paste all of that stuff. And once you've pasted, it fills out this web page with all of your gear, your talents, gems, essences, all that kind of stuff, all the good stuff. Now, there are some options here, but not many of them are really all that useful. If I scroll down to the bottom, the only option that I would suggest you use quite a bit is if you click into this simulation options section, you can choose the fight style, and there's two useful ones. One is called patchwork, which is single target boss fight, and the other one is called dungeon slice beta, and that's a kind of simulated part of a dungeon run, so that will help you choose gear, and most particularly talents and essences for doing mythic pluses. I'll just leave it on patchwork for now. Might do some of that later. So the main thing that you would do here is decide whether you want to use a different bit of gear, and by luck my Demon Hunter got this new helm this morning. So the ones that are come pre-selected here are what you're already using, and it's because these are azurite pieces, it's got some pre-selected azurite powers in there. And to add something else to the list of things I want to compare, I just click on it, and then because this is an azurite piece, I'll just click all of the possible little things to make it choose between them. Now, one thing that you'll see is this iterations green thing that's here, and I give raidbots Patreon subscription $3 a month, so your number will be smaller than this 1.8 million. I would highly suggest, if you use this a lot, to give them $3 a month, but thus here ends the ad. So basically, after you've chosen some things, and I'll go through a little bit more of the specific things in a sec, you just click this Find Top Gear button, and it starts grinding away, running a bunch of simulations of you doing a boss fight based on what you chose with the different combinations of gear. And when it finishes, you get this report. Now, the first thing I suppose I would say is don't pay too much attention to the DPS number that comes up. It's kind of a hypothetical optimized DPS number when you've got lust at the optimum time and you've double potted and using a rune and everything. So that's kind of the best you could possibly hope to achieve. The important thing here is that in this list of my gear, it's chosen my top gear, and it says I should switch to this Guise of the Insatiable Maw, and it's given me the list of Azerite traits that it thinks that I'll get the best DPS out of. Is that kind of fairly obvious to everybody? No, it did. This is the new one. I'm gonna have to check that now. No, the one I'm wearing is very clearly a snake. And this one is very clearly a maw. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, when I click the final talent, it'll come up to 450. So on this screen, it's highlighted the things that have changed in that box. Yes, it did. So these are the ones that it recommends I should use. So realistically speaking, when I pick a bit of Azerite gear, I usually go to the other bits that I'm wearing and choose a bunch of the... some of these are not relevant, so... Because in some cases only one of a particular power is useful, and it might not necessarily give me the best combination of Azerite powers if I just tell it update this bit of gear without rechecking the others. And that number of things it's got to sim adds up pretty quickly, so if you don't have the Patreon, then you might be doing this multiple times, choosing smaller numbers of things and then comparing them yourself. Wow, I don't know what I did there. Maybe I forgot to choose it. But it thinks my current gear is better. If I go back to that page again and you scroll down, you can actually see the differences. And I would honestly say that anything less than 100 is more or less a rounding error. So although it kind of thinks, some of the time it thinks I should switch and some of the time it doesn't, because they're so close it doesn't really make any difference. So something more interesting in terms of simming me, I'm currently spec'd and talented into the dungeon slice stuff, so I know I can get better single target damage by choosing some different essences. One of the things that I might suggest that you try, if you don't know what else to do, is you can click this advanced controls in the essences. So I've left all the gear as it was, and I've scrolled down to the Azerite essences part, and I'm going to just rank all these up to rank 3, because because by default it's sort of only choosing the ones that I already have. So you can sort of, if you do this and run the two types of sim, you can figure out which essences you really should be trying to get. It's too many things for me. I've got way too many of these. Really didn't think it would be that many. Anyone know what the good ones are? It's Breath of the Dying, is it, I think? Never gonna have that, I don't PvP. Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna unselect enough until it... Alright, I give up. I'm gonna restart this. Was I? Yeah, alright, well that'll do it then. Yeah, I just reset by pasting that back in there. I was like, I don't know where it's gotten to. I'm just gonna bail out and select all of these. Yeah, that's working a lot better. Get rid of some I know are no good. The problem, yeah, it will use the rank that I've gotten. No, I don't think there's a way to do that. This is not a particularly good way of choosing your best essences, but this is going to take a while to sim, so I'll just set it up, and while that's grinding away, I'll switch to bloodmallet and show you a little bit of that while this is... No, it's not going too slow. So yeah, you can see for a single target it's upped me, well, 2 and a bit K DPS by switching out one of my essences to Condensed Life Force from the Dungeon Beam. So I would very much suggest that everyone has a setup for Mythic Plus and a different setup for raiding, because Mythic Plus AoE is pretty much everything. And losing that 2k DPS and gaining tens of thousands of DPS on a trash pack is well worth it. I'm going to reset this again by pasting into it. You can obviously check lots of bits of gear at a time by choosing as many things as you want, and if you have a lot of different stuff in your bags, that can be quite useful. You can also change your enchants. The enchant changing is very combination heavy, so whenever I do it I have to have some idea about what's going to be good to begin with and sort of untick until I get low enough. It's not a problem when you get a new piece of gear with a socket, because it will basically tell you, it will always tell you what to put in an empty socket. You can also use this to sim different talent builds. So, you know, you can choose a bunch of different talents and say, show me which talent combination is going to be the best. That's a bit theoretical. It's based on a perfect player, their simulated robot getting everything exactly right. I wouldn't suggest that you necessarily pick the Mythic Raider talent recommendations unless you know you're going to be good enough to do it. In a lot of cases, the WoW Head and Icy Veins guides have what they call easy mode, talent selections, but I personally wouldn't feel ashamed about using them. In fact, on all but 2 characters, I think I do use the easy mode ones because I know I'm just not playing it and practicing it enough to get them right. Yeah, that's true. There is a setting in the options here somewhere, and I can never quite figure it out about how good the player is. Um, you can sort of set yourself to I'm kind of a dud, or I'm okay, or I'm perfect. You can get pretty close to perfect. Like, it's not that unachievable. None of the things are that hard. So I guess that's really most of that part of the top gear on raidbots, and I use this every time I get new gear to figure out whether it's any good or not. I just click the minimap icon, cut and paste the thing, select the new gear, optionally select some of the talent stuff, and then click find top gear, and I do what it tells me. And as far as I know, that's always right. I tend to take the approach to these things that unless I know I'm smarter than the people who wrote this website, that I should believe them. If I have a good reason to do something different, then clearly it doesn't apply to me. But if I have no better idea, this is definitely going to be better than what I can figure out for myself. So I'll show you one more thing on raidbots, and this is going to take forever to sim. So there's a thing here called Droptimizer, and it has the same paste box. Put your character in, but instead of letting you choose a bunch of things from your bags and gear, it lets you choose some content, and it will tell you more or less how good the pieces of gear are going to be. And in this case, I'm going to choose the Azurite vendor and the random roll 475 gear, and it's already selected all of that possible gear that's going to come from the raid, from the Azurite vendor, I should say. And in about 10 minutes time, that will finish getting through its stages, and it will have a recommendation for me. And that will be quite interesting. While that's grinding away, I'll switch to bloodmallet, and we'll do a little bit on that as well. So this is the other website, bloodmallet, and it uses the same simulation craft mechanism behind it, but it really works on the principle that they've collected all of the possibilities, run the simulations, for tens of hours, and they've figured out some of the best combinations for each class and spec. And again, it's only for DPS, and you can go in here, bloodmallet.com, click on your class and spec, and you'll get a bunch of options here for show me more or less what are the best things in these from these categories. So here it's showing me the trinkets, and these are, if I scroll down, it's most of the available sort of high level trinkets that are in the current tier, including all of the mythic plus one that's ranked up, and it's got a rating for each one. And you'll see that the bar is up to 4 different colors, and the different colors represent the different item level of the item. So if I look at this Cold Tyrann Cannonball Runner, you can see that the base 430, what they've considered base at 430, is 2,975 DPS, and then there's extra for every eye level that it goes up. And you can also see, quite interestingly, with the next one down, that the scaling is not necessarily linear for some trinkets, and the same goes for other things that have eye levels and special effects. Sometimes the first, just having it, is the biggest DPS increase, and then you only get this really tiny extra from getting it up, in which case Vita Charge Titan Shard is probably something that's worth farming in LFR for me. I'm probably not going to do that because I don't like LFR, but just the base LFR one would be the third best, more or less the third best trinket that I'm going to be able to get, because I'm going to be stuck in this white, if I'm lucky, this white or possibly this green band for gear. The other thing that you can do here, we're probably none of you are going to have mythic rating trinkets. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. So you can go into the advanced options and untick the item level to say I just don't want to see that high item level. And in fact, if you only want to compare exactly the 460 things and get a single graph with no colors to confuse you, you can do that as well. And I use this more or less to figure out which trinkets I'm going to aim for, and when I get a new trinket, how good it is, and in some cases whether I think I should trade a trinket to someone else. And because I'm a healer, sometimes I use it to set my loot spec to DPS for particular bosses if they're going to drop one of these really good things. And it has the same kinds of graph for the essences. So you can see here, just like the Sim, Condensed Life Force is by far the best essence that I could have, and then they sort of go down from there. This one has a combination of major and minor included in it, so the ones that are minor will just say it in the name there. And if you want, you can choose show me only the minor ones to see which are the best just for minor. Again, for the Azerite powers, same kind of thing. And also they just recently added this corruptions you might get on your gear. So you can see infinite stars, rank 3 is by far the best thing. I'm not sure, I don't think this has been updated yet for the nerf, but I think the nerf still has it well in front of the other things, like the gap between infinite stars 3 and 2 and most of the other things is just phenomenal. It's said we might update it, and if we do, you'll notice that the corruptions page is different, but I don't know what it looked like before, so I don't know how to tell. So, and also the other thing, it has races, but you know, they don't really matter. I mean, in case of Demon Hunters, it's not very helpful because there's only 2 and they're more or less the same. I do quite like this secondary distributions, which sort of, it's a 3D graph, which is sort of hard to see about what the stat balance is for the best DPS, and you can rotate it around. And I don't know, this is very obvious, but it's got a sort of 4-dimensional graph here where all mastery is on that end, and all versatility on this end, and all crit on this end, and all haste up there. And this highlighted one it thinks is my best DPS, which is quite a lot of crit and versatility, some haste and not much mastery, so it gives me some idea of what the good stats are likely to be. That's kind of all there is to Bloodmallet. It's not very interactive. You just go there and you look at stuff and you figure out what's good. Highly recommend it. They rerun The Sims basically every night. It seems to always be pretty up to date. If I switch back to raidbots now, hopefully this is finished. So it's finished doing that Droptimizer simulation, and here it's telling me what my best gambling chance is likely to be, and it's based on the expected value of, even if I got unlucky, like what's the average bit of gear I would get. And you can see here the specific bits of gear have a little number under them, which tells you how big an upgrade that piece of gear would get. And this is why I spent all last year hoping for the piece of gear that said 4.2 and getting the piece of gear that said -1. Can't win them all. I find that really helpful, and now that I've run that, unless my gear significantly changes, I probably won't run it again. I don't know when I'll get enough Titan Residium to buy one of these things, but the good news is that once it's run, it does save the things that you've done under this little hamburger menu. So this Droptimizer Azerite vendor for me is there, and actually I ran one before, so you can sort of just go back to the site if you've logged in and made an account, and it'll remember that you've done one, and you can just go back and reference it again without having to wait the 10 minutes for it to run. And the last thing I was going to show you was it does have it's got a stat weights calculator. The usual caveats come with stat weights. They're not very accurate comparing to running the Top Gear simulation, but if you want to see that some of your stats are garbage, you can go in there, you just paste the stuff in, you run it, and it just comes back and says these are the stat weights. The kind of slightly more interesting thing is this quick sim. So if I paste in there, it has no options, you just run it, and it's going to do a one run and tell me about my DPS. And it's got a little graph here, which I like, and so the graph has the abilities that I'm using and more or less what percentage of DPS they ought to be. And I sometimes, very infrequently, but sometimes compare this to what I'm seeing myself when I'm looking at Warcraft logs after we've done a raid log, and hope that the numbers match up. And if they're wildly out, it's probably because I'm doing something wrong. There's one more interesting thing. I also like this because it's sort of telling me the percentages of damage that some of my proccing abilities are doing. So this is the proc from the weapon that I'm using, and you can see that there's a reason that that weapon is far and above the best weapon I could possibly have, because this proc on it is almost 4% of my DPS. The last thing here is that you can click on the original non-interpreted simulation craft output, which is kind of ugly, and I wouldn't recommend trying to understand it too much. But if you scroll right down to the bottom to where it says action priority list, and scroll down to the bottom of that, you can see this is the actions it thinks I would have cast in order if I was doing it perfectly. And there's a lot of stuff that's, it wants me to flask and use a rune and food and pre-pot. But this is kind of telling me what it thinks my opener should be. So the opener here is, I start with Focused Azerite Beam, Immolation Aura, Demon's Bite, Eye Beam, Death Sweep, continue on like that. And then here is the Cyclotronic Blast. And I find that kind of useful just to see, in a lot of cases, the opener is kind of a good example of what you do in a cooldown situation, because it's expecting that I've got Lust and a pot and various kinds of things here. So I find that useful just to check that I'm sort of doing things right. It's not as good as reading a guide for how to do your rotation and what the opener should be, but it is a sort of useful check about the order of kind of maybe the first 10 things. And it goes on for pages and pages and pages, but I never read past the first 20 seconds worth, whatever my cooldown is going to be. But as I said, that was part of the quick sim, and it's this option right down the bottom here, full HTML report. I think that's all I was going to cover. It probably went longer than I hoped. Sorry about that. Anyone got a question or want me to go back over anything in particular? So if you want to, I'll just load myself back into Top Gear here. If you want to change your weapon enchant by default, lost it completely. Here. By default it will only add weapons and gems that don't have one already, enchants and gems. So you have to tick this box, replace existing gems and enchants, in order for that to work. Yeah, just because it's so slow and there are so many options, most of the time it doesn't bother trying to replace things unless you tick that little box that's there. Yeah, there's kind of too many of these, even as it is. It doesn't want to sim them all because I've got 2 weapons and a whole bunch of gems. So I think I want versatility gems. So if I unclick gems, you can, if you do just weapons or just gems, one at a time, like I can pretty much unselect all of those, and it's just not going to change my gems. And then it'll choose between all of those enchants. Hopefully I've got it right. Let's see how I did. Yeah. Yeah, that is a feature of being a Patreon that I forgot to mention. I pretty much go to the front of the queue for $3 a month, and I use this enough that that's worth it for me. I think there plus whatever time I'm taking here because I got there in front of you. Yeah, they've got 50 servers or something, so it just farms it out, and multiple of them happen at once, obviously. Hey, I'm okay. So that's all I was going to cover. Thanks everyone for spending the time to listen in. I very much recommend doing this. As far as I'm concerned, it's the only way that you can know how to gear and essence and all that kind of stuff yourself properly. I will try to upload this video if it recorded correctly, and you can listen to my terrible jokes again if I made any. Other than that, good luck to us all. No problemo.